Hi, I'm Rob Cross. I'm the author of Beyond Collaboration Overload, a book that just went live on September 14th. Worst advice I ever got as an academic was to not do work that had practical impact, to focus purely on theoretical contributions with all the research that I was doing.
Why would anybody say that, Rob? Why would we want
Had the
just
same
theory,
reason
man?
in my mind. What you find as you get into academia is there is a whole swath of publications that people spend 3, 4, 5 years of their lives trying to get into that nobody's ever read. Not even their mothers read these things, just a small set of academics. And there's huge value in them. There's a huge value, and I contributed to that body of work in different ways. But taken to the extreme, it leads people to identity just around that side and not kind of ways what we can do can have impact. To me, it's crazy, right? The consortia that I run, we've got 110 organizations in it, and the impact that we've been able to have by interacting so closely with all these people trying to apply your ideas has been just fantastic, right? It's helped advance the ideas, in 5 years, what took me 20 years before to have impact with.
Awesome. Awesome. So the book is Beyond Collaboration Overload, but let's define how you define collaboration so that we can kind of set the stage for our conversation today.
Awesome. Yeah, perfect. Yeah, for me, it's just really at the heart of it, the amount of time that we're spending in interactions with others through phone, email, meetings, instant messaging applications, kind of collaborative spaces, and reflecting on that, not just in terms of the interactions we're having at work, but also the interactions that we use to manage our home lives these days have really exploded. And what we could see in this is that the volume of time as organizations have gone to more delayered structures, they've adopted all these, seemingly great collaborative tools. The collaborative footprint of our work has shot up in a whole bunch of ways to where pre-pandemic we were seeing people spend about 85% or more of the week in those activities, just collaborating, right? Not actually executing on the work per se, but collaborations around it. And of course, the pandemic, that number's gone up and is drifting earlier into the morning and deeper into the night. So that's what I'm concerned about. When I look at the analytics and the load that's being put on people, that organizations aren't designed to see anymore or really understand kind of what's happening, unfortunately, today in terms of what they're measuring anyway.
Wow. So more than 85%. So that's, if you say that's even more, I mean, that's 90% of time. That's 50 or more minutes per hour that is spent just
Right.
bouncing ideas back and forth off each other. 10 minutes of actually doing work. Dude, is it just because we have all these tools, or what's the cause of this, Rob?
Yeah, I think a lot of it is driven by kind of incremental efforts to get greater efficiencies or kind of following consulting advice, for example. And I'm not picking on consultants, but most of them, when they're implementing matrix-based designs, agile structures, the primary idea around how do you get speed and time to market is just how do you reduce the decision hierarchy, right, in the organization, make execution happen more rapidly. Where what we can see is that there are also phenomenal inefficiencies that get created when, for example, you have 3 to 5% of people absorbing 20 to 35% of the collaborations. There's just too much connectivity kind of put down on a very small set of people. And we're not really designed to see this. And it's not just the consultants. It's a whole suite of things that have happened. There's been delayering going on for 10, 15, 20 years that's created this greater collaborative footprint. All these relatively cheap technologies that organizations adapt because they looks like it can solve a problem quickly, and suddenly you see most people in the companies I'm involved with, they're managing across 9 of these platforms or more. And so there's a huge, effort to kind of promote connectivity and collaboration that way as well. So, and then you throw in globalization, greater interdependence of work, all these other things. And it's created this kind of hyper-connected context in most organizations that's just crazy these days.
Wow. So over connection instead of under connection. The promise of email was and the internet was to connect us all. Now we're over connected. And you say nine collaboration platforms. So I don't know that I know 9 collaboration platforms, Rob, but let's try it. So we got Slack,
Yeah.
Basecamp, Google Docs, Trello. I mean, give us some more examples here, and then
Email,
let's dive in. Okay, email.
instant message, gratitude, applications. There's other things like that, kind of smaller team or instantaneous connectivity apps. There's well-being apps now that are starting to kind of promote, greater connectivity and get interaction that way that's focused on well-being. So none in isolation, right? They all make sense, right? But it's the accumulation that we've seen in a lot of organizations. And when I'm saying 9, this was a study we ran. It was, for me, it was very much focused on the well-being impact of this over connectivity. And that was the average that the kind of mid-level leaders were talking about managing across. So collaboration overload for me is, in part, it's just the volume of the demands that's happening to us, but it's also the switching costs. The way we move across these platforms, or if we let IM come in and interrupt us, what we know, the cognitive psychologists show that just looking down at a text and back up is about a 64-second recovery, for example. But all these interruptions, it's the same math you were just doing that I love, 50 hours in an hour. If all those interruptions, if you, the small ones, or if you actually get interrupted to a degree that you lose your train of thought, you forget where you were and you had to kind of acquire what the cognitive psychologists call that schema again, that can be as much as 23 minutes to kind of get back to the productive state that you were. So you add it up and it's pretty significant, not just the volume, but also the distractions, that happen today in different ways.
Wow. So 64 seconds for just a basic, I'm looking away interruption. 23 minutes if we lose our way and have to get back in the schema. That's so fascinating, man. I mean, it's no wonder that nothing gets done in a lot of these organizations because we're so overwhelmed with, oh, hold on. Oh, I just got another ping. Oh, I got to think about this. Right. So right. Okay, so we're past that, right? But the promise of your book here, How to Work Smarter, Get Ahead, and Restore Your Well-Being. Let's start with the work smarter, Rob. Give me one thing that we can do today to work smarter and how that helps us.
Yeah, so I mean, one, just to pick on the idea that we're talking about is block reflective time, right? And secure and hold that. And everybody says they try it and then they give the time up because they let the system kind of come in on them. But what we can see, work we just published with for a collaboration I did with Uber and General Mills, went into Harvard Business Review last week, showed that just a 2-hour block is almost a 1-to-1 improvement in productivity for people. So it's a huge deal to get just 2-hour blocks. But what I was actually seeing in the work, as I went through all these interviews, I would kind of find who are the people that are giving the greatest impact in their organizations and taking the least amount of their colleagues' time, right? So those were my efficient collaborators. Went out and interviewed 100 women, 100 men to see, what are you doing that's getting you back about 18 to 24% of your time. And what I would hear really is that one really key thing is they were more intentional in managing to a rhythm of work that was their own, right? So I would talk to one person, for example, and they would say, gosh, the first thing I do is email in the morning, right? So I can get that out of the way. And I would think initially that, gosh, that must be a good practice because they're the efficient collaborators. So I'd ask the next person, well, do you do email first thing? And they would look at me and say, are you crazy? If I start with email, I'll never get off it, right? And so for them, it was I start with the creative work early, and I do email in 3 30-minute blocks, for example. And I'm communicating to others when they're going to hear from me. And so they know kind of expectation-wise and how to manage their time, and they do much better, right? So what I find in this all, one easy thing is to be intentional, more intentional than we sometimes allow ourselves to be. But be very intentional and kind of imposing structure in your work. And we find the more efficient collaborators, they're block reflective time. They strategically calendar on Friday night and Sunday night with a 1 week and usually 3-month time horizon where they're focusing on what are the kinds of work I want to be pulling myself into. They manage role interdependencies. They just do things on one hand that are about how are they putting structure into their work. They can't control everything. But the problem today is we can't control more than we allow ourselves to think we can. A lot of times we just give up control of the situation and become too responsive to all the things coming at us. So that's one element. There's a couple others too that I can pass on to the extent that's all.
Yeah, let's go a little deeper on that because I think intentionality is great, right? I mean, in theory, I try my best to set a perfect week, and then I get a Basecamp notification, and I get an email, and then I get a text, and then I get a Slack, and then I get a Facebook message, and crap, now it's 3:00, and there goes my day. So give me another give me another tip there, Rob, because I think it's super helpful.
Well, Yeah. So, and none of this works perfectly either. I really want to emphasize that this is a game. I call it it's a brawl, not a ballet. And this is something that these people that are, again, they're about 18 to 20% more efficient, which is about a day a week. If you think about it. So they're getting that time back, not by one solution. And this is always the funny thing for me if I'm writing for Wall Street Journal or Harvard or other places. They want that one sexy, seductive principle that everybody can remember, and it's not that game. This is a game where we see there are a series of practices that more efficient collaborators do, and the goal is to help people get down to the two or three they need to be dogmatic on, right? So in your case, what I would be saying is, do you have really clear North Star clarity on what are the capabilities you want to be using in your work, right? What is it? Is it analytics? Is it creativity? Is it industry knowledge? Is it being a thought leader? What are the capabilities, and then what are the values you want to experience, right, in your work? Is it giving back? Is it mentoring? Is it other things like that? And the people that are more clear on that are more quick to say no to some of these immediate things that seem urgent, you know what I mean, or to push them off in different ways. And so this notion, what I see with the more effective collaborators is they're better at putting structure into their world, and it never works out perfectly. So like you're saying, you design the perfect week, and maybe they only get 40% of the perfect week, but over time, that's 40% more than a lot of people are getting, and it accumulates, because they're persistent with it. I'll give you one more thing that surprised me, and then
Please do. No, please do.
when I came into this, so imagine I analytically defined who are the people that are giving the greatest impact, taking the least amount of time. I'm interviewing them, 100 women, 100 men. So I was completely convinced coming into these interviews that the enemy was out there, that it was time zones, emails, demanding clients, nasty bosses, right? That was an uncontrollable kind of external thing that was causing the problem. But going through it, it became incredibly clear to me that 50% or more of the problem is us, and the kind of beliefs that we bring into collaboration that lead us to jump in situations where we may not necessarily need to, or it's not greater value add for us. And so what I found, that it took me about 100 interviews to kind of realize this was happening. But I would ask people, to kind of tell me about how they're getting more efficiencies. And you imagine if you were on the phone with me, we'd start off kind of just talking about, I use email this way, I run meetings this way, kind of tactical things. And then about minute 45, every single time, somebody would kind of get a sense of what I was up to and relax a little bit. And they would say some variant of, Rob, I hit a point in my life where I was fed up, right? And you would see the emotion rise, the energy rise. And so I would always think that the next sentence, right, is going to be magnificent. Like I hiked the Himalayas, I sailed the ocean, I wrote a concerto, did something magnificent. And every single time I was woefully disappointed. It was like I decided I was going to go home one day a week on time, right? Or I was going to put the phone down from 6 to 9 p.m. and not answer email until my kids were in bed. And but the funny thing is these people would worry about that. And they would describe, I talk to my friends. What do they think if I go do this big egregious thing? And then they would go do it. And because it was retrospective, they were looking back in time. 95% of them burst out laughing at some point, saying nobody even noticed when I did this thing. You know what I mean? I went home one day a week to get to my trainer or whatever. And so it hit me as we were going that that's not overload driven by nasty bosses, emails, time zones, demanding clients. That's deep-seated beliefs on how we need to exist in a group, right? And how we add value and what that means. And we really came to see that people have really deep triggers that lead them to jump in when they shouldn't. For some, it's a desire for accomplishment. For some, it's a need for status. For some, it's a desire to help. Right, a servant-based mindset is what leadership is about, right? And there's a set of these that lead people to jump in a micro moment to situations, and then they end up overwhelmed kind of 12, 18 weeks later, but often can't even remember that they started it to begin with, right? It was their kind of jump in that moment that started it. So learning to guard against that is a bigger deal than a lot of times we think about, when we're just focusing on, say, the various modalities that people are connecting with.
So our desire to help, our desire to serve, our desire to collaborate is actually making this worse. We actually want to help. We believe that we need to help. We believe there's this urgency. I'm a sales guy, so speed to lead matters. And yet when we don't,
right,
nobody notices.
Right.
It's so
Or we're more
interesting.
intentional about when and how, we jump in. And so the lead story that really runs through the book is a leader that was failing dramatically because he was a heavy servant-based mindset. He would see things go over email and feel like he had to show his team he was present, right? And he would jump in ways that suddenly the team was managing the issue and they were managing him separately, and it resulted in more meetings and things, on his calendar. But he couldn't see that, right? And it was well intentioned. 9 times out of 10, when people see the big analytics we run, and they see people that have gotten into choke points in these networks where they have way too many people coming to them and more people saying they have to have more of their time, the knee-jerk reaction is, oh, that's a micromanager, right? They can't let go. And only in small instances is it the case. People get in trouble this way for other reasons that have to do with just how we think we need to jump in. Now, the really important thing I want to emphasize is what I am saying really clearly in this book that sometimes people miss in the title is that the high performers in this work, they're actually collaborating more, but they're doing it in a better way, right? So the book is really organized around this infinity loop of how to buy time back. How do you find the inefficiencies in your collaboration? And then how do you invest it differently to get scale, right? So that's really the heart of it. To me, was not so much about the buying the time back, really, but that is a device to then say, okay, what are these people doing that are actually scaling their accomplishments, and kind of experiencing better well-being.
Yeah, you don't want to efficiently suck. You want to efficiently get results, right? You want to focus on, right. I mean, because that's the thing. I mean, I'm not trying to do more. I'm not trying to produce more. I'm trying to produce more better, right? Is that kind of what you're saying here, Rob?
Totally. Well, and most people should immediately resonate with this going through the pandemic, right? Many, many people have had the experience of taking like 8 1-hour meetings they were having, and now they're 16 30-minute meetings because they're just trying to cram more in and get more done. And it doesn't work. And I'm using that mathematically just as an example, but you get the idea. Yeah. We're moving to shorter meetings, trying to jam more in there. And we end up exhausted at the end of the day because you have to be more intense in those shorter spurts. You have difficulty switching the domains for reasons I was telling you. And then you end the day with a to-do list based on 16 meetings, not 8, right? And so you've got more to do. And it's all a product of saying, okay, how do I try to cram more in the same way versus how do I think about getting scale differently in these connected times? So that's just one example of the idea. Like, you can't just buy the time back and then go do the same thing because you'll wind kind of back up in the same frenzy again.
Wow. Well, one of the things that I like you talk about that's the very practical thing is you talk about the use of standing meetings and how those can really help us. And I saw that in your HBR article too. So talk to me about standing meetings. Like, help us define that first, because we hear about that. What makes an effective standing meeting? And then how does that help us get more better instead of just more meetings?
Yeah. So there's two thoughts, if I can kind of go in two directions on that. Because on one level, whenever we sit down, if there's somebody that's overwhelmed, there's a very simple exercise we do that's written about in the book where we have people look back in their calendars 4 months. And what they're looking for are kind of calendar entries, email headers, and they're not looking for the big thing that's crushing them, right? What they're looking for, what are the small interactions I'm getting pulled into? Maybe it's around pricing decisions or contact with a given client because I knew them 5 years ago. All these things that have just kind of stuck with you as you've gone that we get used to answering in the moment because it feels small, but if you accumulate it, it adds up to, potentially 18 to 24% of your time. And we find that if you look back 4 months, you can't look back last week because we justify everything, right? We're critically important to everything. But if you get some space, you start to see these routine ways that you're getting pulled into things that you're not really adding unique value to, and it's not adding value to you. And the idea then is, and this is really important, is don't cluster that and give it to your favorite person, right? Because that just creates overload in a different way, right? What you're trying to do is say, where's the rising talent that I'm trying to pull into this group that if I could make them a go-to, person on this capability or pricing or whatever it may be, it serves to delayer that individual and draw in talent, create capability, right? So you're looking back 4 months. And then the other thing I always say is look forward 2 months and look for those recurring meetings and seeing, where do you have them that have just become kind of locked into the calendar. And you could either increase the time between them, decrease the time of the meetings, or maybe even question if they're relevant anymore. You know what I mean? And that tends to give back a tremendous amount of time, all on these small things that we're not seeing And that is the heart of this game, right? It's a brawl, not a ballet, in terms of what people do. The standing idea, when it's done well, when I'm suggesting to keep it, what you're trying to do is stop the 10 interactions that are coming at you at any given point in time that are creating the disruptions. You know what I mean? That are not adding value. Some of those 23-minute disruptions. And what I've seen work well, it doesn't even actually have to be a meeting per se, so long as there is a place or a space that people can be posting, questions to. But let's just take, one average. Let's say it's a relatively slower tempo, so it's one meeting a week. People know they can bring the open items they have that aren't critical into this meeting for a discussion, right? And what that does is it starts to bring the interactions to one point in time versus all the disruptions, right? And the frenzy that gets created that way. And what we see is that the leaders that do this really well, they will create a space where the members of the team are posting, here's the thing I want to talk about, and let's call it the Friday meeting, whatever it is. And people have different challenges to it. And half the time they find that as weeks go on, the team starts solving the problem without the need for the meeting, right? It's kind of posted up there and the team starts to see, okay, here's what I've done with this client, or here's how we could work with this organization. And they actually start to take the need for the meetings down, in a pretty productive way. So that's one thing you're always looking for is it at a right frequency that helps kind of keep as much of the one-offs out as we can? Are we doing it in a way that's creating awareness of expertise in the team so they're solving problems? And then, maybe a little bit oddly, I'm always looking for things that get a little bit off task, right? And just help people connect on a human level as well to create a little bit of engagement with each other.
That's great advice, and that's doable stuff. And I like that it solves itself. I mean, to your point, as we post what we want to talk about, well, maybe I've got 10 minutes now to think about that.
Right.
Whereas if I wait till the meeting, now I've got to process in the meeting. We're bouncing ideas off each other. I maybe not get to do that deep work to really help think about it. Maybe there's more to it. I need more color. And I love that point about the rising talent. Sometimes it isn't the superstar or the person that's got the most experience or the person that you're looking to promote that has the idea or the insight that allows us to solve. It's the rising star that's like, hey, what about if we looked at it this way and give them a chance to shine and show the team that, hey, this is someone to go to. I think that's, wow. I mean, that's so right on, man. I really like that.
Right. And it matters like at that leadership level, you know what I mean, in the sense that it's creating a capability, it's allowing that individual to do more of what they should be doing. It also really matters at the organizational level. Like the last thing you want, especially in the sales side of the house, if we're looking at kind of business to business, the investment banks, for example, you know what I mean? We can actually do these large maps of who's collaborating with whom to generate revenue and see who the key people are that are enabling others to generate wins. You know what I mean? So cross-selling or whatever you want to call it. The last thing you want is the overload to build very heavily around a small set of people, because then if they leave, it is really a big deal. It's not just their book of business. It's the way in which they've been enabling others to do work. So, also from a strategic, capacity, the more you take that down and bring others in, the better everybody is. You know what I mean? If kind of turnover happens. And obviously with 2022 coming, that's a big deal, potentially, with the looming kind of resignations a lot of people are predicting.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, that institutional knowledge is so hard to pass on if there's only a couple of choke points of failure there. Because if they're not sharing, and to your point, not only your superstars leave, but then your up and comers leave because they feel unheard. They feel like they're not making a difference. So that's really, wow. That's great, man. So I love that in the book. Go ahead.
Point. I'm sorry. You can see that in the analytics you do a lot of times is, it's not just that you lose that first person, but if they're somebody that I also call an energizer, and this is, again, kind of getting to that other side of the second part of the book, is not just around how do you buy the time back, but what do you do with it? One of the things we know is that the people that create energy in networks, and by that I don't mean cheerleaders. There's likely to disagree as agree. They do it very differently, right? They don't say that's a bad idea. They say, given where we're trying to go, an alternative. So they're kind of separating the critique from the person exposing their own logic. they do a set of 9 pretty specific things differently that enable them to create enthusiasm around them, create followership for what they're up to. And it has huge effect on the predictive ability of high performers. In fact, that single dimension, if you're somebody that creates enthusiasm in these networks, that's about 4 times the predictor of high performer as anything else we've seen over the years. And so it's a huge deal. But if you lose somebody that's well connected and an energizer, right, in these networks, then the follow-on attrition around them, just like you're saying, is huge. You can see it from time period to time period. The people that they energized, right, or created followership with, are far more likely, to take off. So it's a really big deal, right, to kind of preserve that and to be thinking about it again, especially as we move forward in this different work context.
That's super interesting to understand and to get our arms around, that we need to identify those energizers early and find ways to plug them in and kind of tap their energy without exposing them to over collaboration, right? Without giving them too much. So I was going to say, your book has these coaching ideas in them, which I really love. I think it's so important that we have that in there, because a lot of times, to your point about academics, right? A lot of times it's not practical tactical. It's theory. It's
we like to
that we
think we are, but not all the time. Yeah, we try hard.
Yeah. Well, yeah. So as someone who's read a ton of books, man, I'll paint that brush over, right, and say that isn't always true. Of course, that is always the attempt. But let's talk about some of those, because one of the coaching tips that you have in the book or the stack, if you will, it's about a page and a half, is around the idea of energy. So let's talk about that, and let's talk about how we can coach for energy. And maybe if we're a high-performing individual contributor that's hearing this, how can we, as those hypo ICs, really make this happen with our boss? Maybe how can we manage up?
Right. What we see is this started literally 23 years ago. I was in one of the major blue chip consulting firms, and I won't mention the name of it, but it was one of the first times we were looking to predict high performers. And by that, I don't mean people that know a lot of people. I mean people that are producing the greatest amount of revenue. They're on the upwardly mobile track, getting promoted more rapidly than their peers. That's kind of how we've measured it. And I'll never forget it for as long as I live, as I would develop this massive way of studying those people that we were trying to see, well, are they distinguished by how smart they are, right? Their degrees, their expertise, is it how they use the technologies around them to kind of answer client questions or things, or is it their network, right? And what we found is you could land in the bottom 25% by not being smart enough using the tools, basically. What got and kept you in the upper quartile was having a structurally diverse network, so one with more bridging ties that you could reach out to when client opportunities came. Those people were able to materialize better solutions, ultimately, not because of tapping into some power structure or something nefarious, but just because they had greater awareness of who they could bring in and engage. And they did better things, and then they also created reputation that others started bringing things to them. You know what I mean, over time. And then the other thing I'll never forget is I was about to pull the trigger on this assessment, and the lead partner walking down the hall said, I don't think it's IQ that distinguishes our high performers. I think it's people that create what he was calling buzz around them. He said they get the partners on board with what they want to do, their peers bring them things, their teams give greater efforts, the clients want to buy more. He said all that on the margin doesn't have to do with a couple of points of IQ. It's about the way they engage with others that creates followership right in there. And so we, ran the analytics there and then, showed that it was a huge predictor of high performers. And then for about 20 years, myself or people on my team have gone behind these networks to see what are the energizers, those people who create enthusiasm in these networks do. What do they think they're doing? And then what are the energized? Interview those people to see what they think is going on. So the tool set, and it's obviously in the book, and there's also online tools that we've used, are just gearing around a set of behaviors that we know consistently predict people that create energy. So they tend to create space for others to be a valued part of a conversation, so they're not over pushing their agenda too much. They tend to use humor, and usually self-deprecating humor, to take status out of a situation. They tend to see realistic possibilities on what can be done. So it's not something that's so extreme that people blow it off, but it's also not just focused on that person's goals, so that you start questioning intent and things like that. But what we know with those 9 behaviors, that's just a couple of them to give you a sense, is that the trick is you go down that list, and it's not do you do these things or not, because most people do them at some point. The real trick is when you're under stress or pressure, which 2 or 3 let's slip, right? Which 2 or 3 do you want to be more systematic on? And that tends to really be the essence of what creates these people that they win over time. And I can't emphasize like one point enough here, and that energizers, it's not that they're happy people, but they tend to be, a little bit more glass half full than, but you're just as likely to see an introvert as an extrovert be considered a strong energizer. The reason they win over time is because they get greater effort from others around them. Higher performers want to work with them. People bring them opportunities, and so they're getting scale basically in their work in ways that people that don't do this don't get. You know what I mean? They're just solving the problem themselves. So that's a really big deal in terms of kind of thinking about how to do this as you progress in your career.
Wow. So intentionally working to be an energizer and being very deliberate in that is a great way to be more successful and maybe to conquer some of this collaboration overload that we're experiencing today. So if you were to give us one more point here, Rob, how we can get closer to being an energizer today, or maybe it's a couple of points, because you said there's no one silver bullet here, because it's a brawl, not a ballet. What would, just give us a couple steps? Certainly could be something you said before, but I think it's important to drive this home for folks so that they can get going and work on something.
Yeah. So, one of the big things we know, and the book is, as you know, organized on this infinity loop, right? Of how do you buy time back, and then how do you engage with others in ways that creates performance and scale. So one of the first things we know is that when you get overwhelmed, right, we allow collaborative overload to creep around us. The last do is come into interactions either at work or at home, quite frankly, in ways that create others' enthusiasm. Right? We come in firefighting, and we come in focused on our stuff in a way that hurts people's desire to kind of engage with us and kind of bring things to us, stay with us longer, all these kind of positive benefits that happen for energizers. So the first thing I would say is you really have to take the overload side of it seriously, right? And think about, how am I ensuring that I'm creating that space to engage others? Then purely tactically, if I look at what the more successful leaders do, they are far more likely to maintain systematic one-on-ones with people on their team. If I take this from a leadership standpoint, where about 50% of the time is off task, right? So part of it is kind of what work do we need to get done, but about half of those one-on-ones is around, what are you trying to do with your career? What kind of work is energizing you? Where are you going? Things like that. And then the magic of those people is that they then shape the work coming into the team. Not perfectly, right? You can't define everything that the client's asking or other things like that. But the really successful leaders, they kind of get ahead of the client asks, and they shape the nature of the work coming in based on what they know inspires the team, right? What people want to be doing, how they want to engage, and they get greater engagement, greater effort from their team because of that, right? A real simple thing. You got to get ahead of the game on both sides, the client side and the individual side. But the people that do that, they suddenly have higher performers wanting to work for them. Those high performers stay longer, so they have less turnover and attrition. A lot of really positive benefits that start to accumulate in there, all because they're engaging in ways that create others' energy, right? Not just their own pursuits.
Wow. I love that, Rob. The book is fantastic, by the way. Congratulations. It's called Beyond Collaboration Overload. Really great stuff here, man. So much inside of that. Rob, folks can go to robcross.org, check you out there. And I love, you started a company or an organization, I guess, of Connected Commons, which I think is super, super cool. So I encourage folks also to go to connectedcommons.com, check that out and get to know Rob. Rob, such great stuff. I love the idea of the infinity loop because it's something we can do something about. It is about being better and about fighting through the brawl instead of having a ballet. And I really appreciate all that you shared today, Rob. Good stuff, man. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Thank you very much.